Hello, everyone. Good morning. We'll let folks continue to trickle in as we know that 10 sharp Central is not realistic for everyone, but we feel that 10:02 sharp Central might be a better fit. Yes,
Wise.
that's what I'm thinking. Excited to have you guys here in Chicago. Dan, out of the basement, rescued from the years in the bunker.
Brought to the Windy City.
Brought to the Windy City. It's a rough day to emerge from the basement. It's good. Yeah. It's a good look for you. I've yet to see you not in a suit, in like a three-piece suit.
It's true. It happens.
Yeah. There it is. It happens. And Chris, good to have you back.
Yes. Thanks. It's good to be back in town.
Last time you were here as a colleague, now as a customer.
Yep.
Does that change things? Does that have to like treat you differently? Something? Yeah.
Nope. It's good to be back in the Windy City. Good to see Dan as well. It's been a while. So I think we were in Dana Point last week. We're talking at ESG conference.
That was a really good event. It was one of the first ESG only events, and a lot of real solid feedback came from that. I think they're going to do another one in Nashville in February at the IMF team.
Okay. Cool. Far preferable location.
Which one?
Dana Point.
Dana Point. Yeah. Well, they chose a nice Waldorf Astoria.
I heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michelle did tell me a lot about that event, and that it was a must-attend event.
But the content was great. Last night with our friends from Harrison Street that were here, Joe Brozick really set the tone that morning in July at Dana Point by talking about, you can't win ESG, and she was pretty passionate up there. So
I told her yesterday after the session we had here, she's a wonderful speaker.
She is.
She really is very captivating. She's a good storyteller.
Yep.
So, all right, it is 10:02, and as promised, we will get started at 10:02 sharp. So, hello everyone, welcome to 100 to 0 on the path to net zero and carbon neutral portfolios. I'm Healy Lev, Chief Revenue Officer of ESG at Conservice. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss how to get started on the path to delivering net zero portfolio. We will examine all stages of the journey to net zero, including data acquisition, forming an effective ESG team, implementing carbon reduction strategies, and everything in between. We will also provide insights into the emerging trends and the ways that successful ESG programs and teams are evolving to handle increasing challenges and achieving future-focused initiatives. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, but I think you guys are all involuntarily muted, so no worries there. But we will distribute the recording after the session. Second, we will save time for questions, but if you have a question at any point in time, you can submit it in the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions section, and we will answer as many questions as we can, or follow up if we don't get to all of them. With that out of the way, let's have our speakers. I don't think you guys introduced yourselves. I think you're celebrities in this circle, this ESG circle sandbox of ours, but perhaps reintroduce yourselves in case there are any new folks. And maybe why don't you tell us your favorite holiday tradition that you're looking forward to this December?
So Chris, let's go alphabetical. That means you.
Okay,
who are you?
I see what you did there. All right. So I'm Chris Luffman. I'm the Senior Director of Sustainability and Energy for Greystar. So we oversee a portfolio of both third-party managed as well as owned assets. Really globally, but my personal concentration, my team's concentration is on our US assets. I have about 20 years of facility management experience. 10 of that is specific to sustainability and ESG. So I was doing sustainability before it was cool. As far as my favorite.
Is it safe to say you made it cool?
I don't know that I can take credit for that. But as far as favorite holiday traditions, I think the thing I like most is every year on Christmas Eve, we make a just immediate family, myself, my two daughters, and my wife, and we have a Christmas dinner. Typically, it's an English traditional dinner with Yorkshire pudding and mushy peas, and it's just a really nice dinner. Then we go to midnight mass. It's just kind of every year we look forward to it. It's just us. It's very nice.
Cool. That is so nice. What are you going to do when one of the girls brings home a +1, or is that just a hard no? Nuclear family only.
I will deal with that when I have to deal with that, and I prefer not to think about that now. It'll happen, but
you just remind them that you have a history in law enforcement, and
always have cooties still, so I'm all right.
Perfect. You're good.
And so hi everyone, I'm Dan Winters. I'm Senior Director at GRESB. GRESB is the global ESG benchmark for institutional real estate. We also have an infrastructure assessment. GRESB was started in 2009 as the original ESG due diligence questionnaire. We've grown every year since. This year we had 1,820 participants in the benchmark. These are either private equity funds or listed real estate investment trust REITs. And so a firm like Greystar is a private, they have many private equity funds. And so I think you've submitted, 12, 13, 14 funds, right? And so we have institutional investors that back us. We've got 180 that subscribe to our data. And they're looking to do things like understanding what their overall carbon exposure is, how that's going to be driven down for 2050 net zero commitments that many of these global pension plans are making. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative and some banks and others have gotten together $100 trillion, have all committed to net zero by 2050, some even more aggressive. And so they're looking down to their fund managers and their real estate operating companies, looking to understand who is a partner in progress and how we're all going to make this happen. So I think those are some of the themes today. And with that, let's go.
Let's do it. So, all right, I'm going to open this up. If you have not yet read Chris Loffman here, original author of an incredible ESG blog. It's called 39. If you don't subscribe to it, do it. And this morning's edition, so it's called Scaling the Summit, Reaching Net Zero. And we're here today to talk a bit about net zero. So let me open with this staggering, a little bit of a depressing fact and headline on your blog. More than 34% of the world's largest companies have made commitments to net zero. That's awesome. However, nearly all are on track to fail to meet that goal. And it's not surprising, right? So you have folks that put these very bold, very prominent commitments out there. Oftentimes, I always joke that it's perhaps the people that'll be retired, by the time the year comes around, they make the commitment, they leave, it's left for the folks behind to figure out how to actually get there. So that being said, nearly all are on track to fail to meet that goal. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? How are we going to fix it? And I do like your analogy before I ask you to elaborate about the summit, right? So you're looking at a mountain. You have a bunch of people at the bottom of the mountain saying, I'm going to climb that mountain. I'm going to do it. I'm going to climb that mountain. That's easy to say, right? But how many are actually going to reach the summit? And that was a really great analogy, I think, to this problem that is faced by a lot of our customers. And like you say here, 34% of the world's largest companies. So
right.
What are we going to do? What is Greystar going to do?
Right. So, I mean, I think it's awesome that we have GRESB and we have these mechanisms that encourage transparency and reporting and where we make statements and we make goals. It's super important to make the goal in the first place. The problem is you have to do more than make the goal, or say you're going to make the goal. You also have to actually do something about it. Another analogy when I think about it is like January 1st is rolling around before you know it. How many people are going to say, this is the year that I'm going to lose however many pounds, right? If you don't actually start the diet, you're not going to lose the pounds. So it's kind of the same idea, is that absolutely you need to set the target and you need to set the goal, or set the goal. You need to be transparent about that, report on it, celebrate that you're going to do it, but then you actually have to go on the diet. And that's where you have to roll up your sleeves and kind of get your eating done. So at that point, we talk about how data is such a critical first factor, first step really, because when you think about how many people say they're going to lose 30 pounds, but they haven't even looked up how many calories they burn, right? You need to understand where you are in the first place. You have to set a baseline. Getting that data, and that's another great thing about the reporting side, is reporting forces you to go out and get that data. So that's why it's such a critical step. The problem is data is messy, particularly utility data. And even if you start paring down the different verticals of commercial real estate, it gets even messier. Multifamily is notorious, triple net is notorious. We're having meters that sometimes we can't even get a hold of. And I think one of the things that we take for granted is we're like, well, why don't you just go and ask for the data? Sometimes it's not my data to ask for. Sometimes it actually belongs to a tenant. who has a direct contract with a utility company that I'm not a party to that contract. So now I have to go convince either a utility company to give it to me, they don't know me, or I have to convince a tenant who's busy making widgets and doing their job to make their revenue. So at that point, now we have to start to navigate this almost chasm of how do I gather this data? How do I start to overcome that? There are specific strategies you can follow to do that. I think one thing to keep in mind though is utility companies are not paid or in the business really, except for a few, to give us data. Their job is to give us energy and then to bill us for that energy. And that's where their technology and emphasis is billing and providing you that energy. It's not in providing you reporting. So therefore, we're trying to navigate these systems that are really not set up to deliver me consumption information, but rather billing information, and trying to figure out how do I take this and apply it and pull the consumption, because it is the same bill. The bill tells me not only what did it cost, but also what did I use. And then through steps like benchmarking, comparison, I can start to figure out what is normal, how do I compare to normal. Then you start to walk down a process, right, where you start to figure out, okay, I'm using more than I should because other buildings of like size and use less than me. Opportunity. What am I doing? Audit. Ashtray level audit, whatever. Now we're starting to take steps. But notice how that's more than just saying you're going to meet the goal. So I'll pause there, but that's kind of a primer of what I was trying to capture in that article this morning was really to try to say, if you're going to go on a diet, you have to actually do the math and figure out how many calories you're burning.
So what I've heard is, so with us, we've had to meet the industry where it is. And in 2009, getting your arms around your portfolios was very difficult. It still is for many, but the folks that we observe that have been in the benchmark for a long time have been able to wrangle the portfolio, you get a good handle of their data, and then it becomes an OpEx, CapEx game, right? So if you're going to get to net zero, you need to understand where you're at, tweak some things on the operational side to start to drive down your consumption, and then look for those intervention moments. It might not be in 2023 when the roof needs to be replaced, or the boiler, the chiller, or whatnot, but there's these moments that if you don't plan ahead for them and they all of a sudden happen, if you don't capitalize on them, you're gonna miss, right? So once you get to that level, then we are dependent on the grid. We need the grid to also decarbonize. So it's not, yeah, maybe there's some opportunities to put some renewables and certain asset types, and that's okay. And I think that the economics are getting better for that in our country. But we've got that road ahead of us. And what I'm seeing a lot more organizations do is push down to all their property managers and say, okay, we need a plan. And that plan needs to be delivered to us by the end of even next year. But what is the plan for this building and this building and that building to get to net zero? And it's putting everybody on notice that this is the goal and it's a team effort.
Yeah, it's almost always the same recipe of efficiency, energy source, and then at the end of the day, if there's something so balancing out what's left that you can't. And it's always that formula. I did want to add one real quick thing, because I think it's important that you pointed it out. It's not just CapEx, it's also OpEx. And OpEx doesn't have to mean spending a lot of money. Sometimes there's operational things that we can do just by doing things better, by doing preventative maintenance, by doing things like Energy Star has a treasure hunt program to help, basically walk properties and find low-hanging, no-cost effort. So many people get fixated on, I need a new boiler. Sometimes part of the solution is literally turning off the lights in the vacant unit that nobody's in. So it doesn't always have to be CapEx. It is a piece of it for sure, but OpEx is equal.
Yeah, the behavioral aspect of it for sure. Just getting people to do those right things. So in the analogy of the diet, so people make the public proclamation, I'm going to lose the weight, right? And there is plans. There's all these plans out there. There's apps. You can count your calories. You can exercise. You can do all these things. Where are people getting stuck? Like, are they just overwhelmed? Is it a budget problem? Like, where are people getting stuck from the public proclamation to like just these tactical next steps of rolling out a program? Do they not know how to roll out a program? Are they not able to communicate it down to the properties effectively? Are there not KPIs? Like where are folks getting stuck on, with good intentions, but maybe not able to take that first step, make it happen?
Can I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a lot of work. And so you just look at the enormity of it, and you're like, all right, so you got to chunk it. And what I like with the submissions that roll into GRISP is you've got this portfolio submission, and it forces this discipline to say, all right, which of our buildings are running great? Which ones are not? So you leave the ones in the middle, you take the ones that are running great, and you're like, oh, what are the best practices that are happening here? And you try to do some OpEx coaching down here. But you focus your attention on the lower end of the portfolio to start to bring it up, right? And that gets you some wins. When I talk to some folks at some of the really big private equity firms, they're trying out certain things with this portfolio company here or this building over there, and to find out what works, and then they bring it out writ large as a program. And so it's not, random acts of sustainability here and there and these other buildings. It's finding out what works and then implementing a program policy-wide throughout the entire portfolio.
I would add, not only is it programs, because for sure that's an important piece of it. Our job as ESG advocates is also to be an educator. And you have to talk to your audience in a language that they understand. So when I'm talking to the C-suite about opportunities, I need to use language and words that they understand. So we need to not overcomplicate things. When we're talking to the CFO, we talk in financial terms. When we're talking to the HR department, we're talking in people terms. When we're talking to operations, we talk in operational terms. It's super important that you're able to read the room and figure out how to propose the program that needs to be done, but in a way that they understand the value of it. And I think that's a piece that sometimes gets overlooked, because if I walk into the operations team and talk completely about social and human pieces, they're going to be like, this has nothing to do with me. I'm looking at the operational aspects. But if I talk to them in operational terms, oh, I see how that impacts me. So you have to put them into the solution. You have to put your audience into the solution, which is engagement, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with your residents. If you're multifamily like we are, we need to figure out how to engage those residents. At the end of the day, this is change management and behavior management. Mm-hmm. We're using programs, absolutely, and things not only about CapEx and OpEx, but I said earlier, we have like this formula, like how we always bake a cake, right? And we always do the dry ingredients separate from the wet ingredients, and the dry ingredients are the operational pieces, right? Where we're trying to do the CapEx and OpEx, but then we have the wet ingredients, that's the generation, right? So do you have a plan for energy purchasing? Do you have a plan for renewables? Are you looking at the different ways where solar can make sense? It makes sense in a lot of places now. So pulling the recipe together, but then being able to present it in a way that the audience wants to consume. I think it's important.
It's good advice in general in life, is just speak to your audience. Speak to their intentions, see things through their lens. If you want to get them on board and you want to get them to help you roll out any sort of effort, you have to kind of just know what resonates with each one. So that's good life, not just ESG advice, that's just good life advice. Mm-hmm. So did you guys mean to say about that? Because that's something you said before.
No, when I was at Greenbuild, I brought up my favorite radio station, which is WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
That's good.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So you mentioned it might just be intimidating the enormity of the undertaking, right? Like it's just a very difficult undertaking. I have X number of assets, some perform well, some don't. I have to change behavior at properties. I have to deal with folks that maybe don't believe in this or don't want to take direction because they know how to run their building. They've been doing it all this time. So there's a lot there. So one thing I've been seeing, the trend I've been seeing, we haven't been in the space for about 20 years. So first you had, the green team. You say, good job, green team. You made a recycling poster. Good for you. Then people start calling it sustainability. And you have the property manager that says, oh yeah, I'm also the sustainability person at my firm, or the asset manager that's like, yeah, I do the sustainability thing. Then we graduated into all types of firms, public, private, all asset classes, saying, you know what, no, sustainability is important enough. I need a proper position of VP of sustainability and director of sustainability. That was a big deal in and of itself, that they would allocate dollars, time, resources to a full-time, say, VP level, dedicated completely to, at the time, we called it sustainability. Now, the next iteration I'm seeing, well, we've graduated, we call it ESG now, and that now folks are building teams around this to start to tackle, I think, the enormity of what this is. This isn't even just a one dedicated person at a firm. This now has to be a team of people in various specialties and disciplines if you're truly going to hit these goals. So I've had customers come to me and ask for advice on how to build these teams. Where does it interact or intersect with utility management folks in the firm and otherwise? So Chris, I know you are building such a team at the moment at Greystar. So can you speak a little bit about that evolution and what you're looking for as you build out your team and how that's going to help you start to tackle this enormous undertaking?
Yeah. So like when I started in sustainability, we used to use the term, we would say we were unicorns. Why are we a unicorn? Because half the company doesn't understand why I'm here, and the other half the company thinks I can do magic. And there's only one of you. I think what we've come to learn over time, and as ESG has gained importance, our understanding of importance within organizations, and a lot of that's tied to investors and access to revenue, so companies can grow. Because that's at the end of the game, companies, businesses are looking to grow and expand and deliver return as they should. But I think what we've realized is it's a big umbrella, and you can't be a specialist in every single area. So you have to start looking at, okay, what are the areas of emphasis of your program? So in our case, talking to our third-party owners, our clients, seeing what their needs are. What are your goals? What are the areas of impact? And that's really the term I was hoping you were going to bring up when you're talking about the evolution.
That's the next evolution.
I think we've gone from ESG, which is to me almost reporting, to impact, which is doing something about the reporting. Even Jill said, she's director of impact, I think.
Right.
Yeah, she wanted impact in her title.
Right.
And now it's their tagline as well.
So we're talking about Jill Brozig at Harrison Street for the audience. Go ahead.
Right. So I think that's as we think about impact, we have to think about, okay, who is the specialist that we can tap, who is excellent in compliance and understands the nuances of the laws and the benchmarking laws and the performance laws and all the regulatory landscape and how to best position your portfolio. Who's the specialist in renewable energy? Who's the specialist in, start going down the list, water conservation, energy efficiency, waste. And that's kind of what we're putting together is a team of people that can deliver value to our clients and our owned assets as well, because really I see them as a client as well, to be honest. They're an internal client, but it's still a client. They have needs and we need to meet those needs. So we figure out what those needs are, and then we build a team of specialists around that. A lot of that includes developing a network of people so you know who's good at what task. So when you need that specialist in X, you know who to go tap for that. And I think the other piece of that network that's super important, and with quite a few people on this call right now, I cannot do it on my own, right? It's going to take every single company out there doing their part. Greystar is a big company, but we cannot make the change that's necessary globally on our own. We need every single company out there to do their part as well. We're going to do our part as well. And it's going to take all of us working together. So building that network, relying on each other, collaborating with one another, really working together in unison, in environments like this, environments like we were at yesterday, where there's lots of people in the room that represent lots of different asset classes and lots of different companies. We're all there for a common goal, and we're all there to help each other to hit that goal.
Let's go back down to I agree with all of those things. Let's go back down to the company level, because you brought up the idea of the internal client, which I think is brilliant, because ESG is integrated into everything, and sometimes it just gets lost. So there's oftentimes this expertise that needs to be relied on by others in the organization. Healy brought up that there's a lot of education that happens. So, if you think about how you want to market a property to the next tenant, well, the ESG person should be working with the marketing team, the brokerage team to say, okay, what are the attributes that we should be discussing here if we're going to try to get additional rent, or to talk about the overall occupancy cost being less in our buildings, right? That requires a team effort internally that needs the ESG person to work with all of the other silos around. So these silos start to depend then on the ESG team, which is amazing because that team ends up knowing probably the most about the company than anybody else.
Sure. Yeah, you know where all the pieces need to fit. You may not have authority to do much about it,
That's the thing.
but you have responsibility for other pieces, and they're positioned to help reach those. So if you think about internal clients, HR, right? We were talking about social a little bit, just very briefly a minute ago. HR is most likely in a better position to address things like employee benefits and health and well-being of employees, right? So partnering with HR, partnering with accounting. Accounting has all kinds of access to numbers and that type of thing. Partnering with IT to make sure that you can pull in the data from the sources. I mean, partnering with operation. I mean, I can literally go down the line. There's probably nobody in the company that we don't need to partner with in order to get some element of the puzzle put together.
And that requires a lot of soft skills and a
Yes.
lot of cajoling and, you know, and getting after people, and but always coming at it from a positive, can-do attitude. I see this from organization after organization. We're like, we want our ESG team to be Mr. and Mrs. Positive and get stuff done, and it works.
I know it was determined during our session yesterday that you cannot win ESG, but if you could win ESG, the people that do, like you said, are the ones that are effective communicators, effective at change management, project management. It's not even, they could be a fine ESG subject matter expert. If they cannot lead change within their organization, and they can't engage all these parties and get everyone on board and mobilize a lot of people, it's not going to work.
So let's give the audience some context for this, what winning ESG means. So GRES, right, we have this annual assessment. We benchmark organizations against one another, and we offer a score from 0 to 100. And so people will get that score, and they will find out that their score is great, but maybe there's some others that are doing better. And we created this sort of a competitive race to the top. And so
Well, you rank people. It's by design. I mean, you can be number one in your peer group.
yes, yeah.
So
And
don't act all innocent like you didn't create a competitive system where you actually rank people and you say you are number one.
we do that. That's right.
Yeah.
But then what does that do? That makes the number one group want to continue that number one.
They
That
wanna
makes
win.
number two.
They want to win ESG.
They do, but all of that helps what Chris was talking about a moment ago, which is all the companies
Right.
piling in and creating this competitive race to the top.
Right. If we're all trying to be number one, we all rise together.
I think it's a good thing. I'm peppering you because I think it is a good thing. I actually think the competitiveness is what makes it sticky. It gives people context. It makes people know what to strive for next year. A lot of our customers have bonuses tied to their GRES ranking, believe it or not. So it's incenting a behavior. You know, it's debatable, I suppose, if it's the right behavior, but if all ships are rising with the tide, then it's arguable that it is the right behavior.
I would even throw in there that if you really want to be progressive about it and moving the next step, not only should bonuses potentially be tied to it, but I would say employee evaluations across the board.
Yeah.
We already asked things like, how do you, get along with others, and how do you do your job, and what's your goals, and what did you do to help meet the ESG goals? It's a very easy to add in. I would challenge people on the call to think about that in their own
I like it.
organizations.
People that are in the capital raising business are now being confronted where their capital sources, these big pension plans, are starting to tie KPIs on ESG to the promote and the whole financial arrangement between the investment manager and the assets themselves and the capital. Sorry.
All right, I'm going to go to a couple questions that have trickled in. So let's talk about offsets for a moment. So you're trying to get from 100 to 0. A lot of arrows are in the quiver. I like what Chris said about start with the ones that don't cost anything, the behavioral ones, the OpEx ones. Then you might have to spend some money on CapEx, make some actual improvements to your assets. That's always going to be a part of it. Then you have this strategy of offsets, right? Which some folks might feel like is throwing money at the problem, right? I'm going to burn my energy over here. I'm going to throw some money to offset it and make it even. And there's like, I think, a mixed emotion that comes along with offsets. Do you feel, I'll ask you first, do you feel that there's a place for offsets as part of a strategy? Is it an arrow in the quiver? Should it be used as a last resort, or should it be used as part of a thoughtful strategy as you get to the summit?
So it's a bit of there's not a right answer. Offsets are only as good as the offset. I know that sounds like I just didn't really answer the question, but they vary in quality, they vary in effectiveness, and you have to be very careful because offsets can lead towards greenwashing. So you need to be careful of perception. There's a lot of negative perception around offsets. There are offsets that are quite viable potentially, but you really have to do research. I would say the best strategy when it comes to offsets, and for those of you not familiar, offsets is typically protecting some forest from not being cut down, or it's maybe it's an active offset, so it's removing carbon from the atmosphere in theory. So there's different types of offsets, but
Like renewable energy credit.
Yeah, a REC could also be an offset, right? But a REC might be considered a more tangible offset than not cutting down a tree, because there's an actual megawatt actually of energy that was created from a renewable source that was put on the grid. So there's actually something that I don't think you want to touch a megawatt, but there's something you can reach out and
There's
touch
some
and
sort of
feel.
chain of custody about what you're
There's
buying.
something
and
real about it.
Yeah.
Versus the problem with like the forest idea is that was the forest going to be cut down anyway?
Yeah.
And if you paid somebody not to cut down a forest that they weren't going to cut down in the first place, did you really make a difference?
Yeah.
So I think in the hierarchy, we always look at efficiency first, no matter what, and we try to reduce energy that you don't need in the first place. It's wasted energy anyway. I mean, literally, you're buying something you don't need. You're buying the apples, putting them in the refrigerator, and then leaving them there to rot. It's the same thing. It's just waste.
Yeah.
Get rid of that. That's OpEx savings. That's NOI improvement. That's literally bottom line impact. The next thing is energy. Concentrate on your energy generation and try to make it as clean as you can. That offset piece comes at the very end, where you're trying to balance what you cannot impact. So then you have to look at the quality of the offset and try to figure out what aligns with my investors or my stakeholders' values. Like, what will they consider to be a good offset that aligns with their values? Because really, at the end of the day, your stakeholders are going to be the one to say this is a good offset or not a good offset. Some stakeholders may say if it's not a REC, it's not a good offset. That doesn't mean that's wrong for the company that uses a different type of offset. It just means their stakeholders have different values. So you have to align. That's where you have to know the materiality of how it applies. Right?
I keep coming back to what you've been reinforcing here, which is an OpEx gain, CapEx, putting marginal capital to work in efficiency, and then whatever is remaining, being directive with your purchase to buy green electrons from the grid to the extent that you can, right? What that does is it creates demand for more renewable energy, which promotes the idea that more solar and wind will fill that demand, and it will, rise the quality of the grid or decarbonize the grid, because we're all reliant on that grid. And putting specific demand out there for wind and solar and other renewables drives that market. I think it's really important.
All right, another audience question. I'm just going to read this one verbatim.
Sure.
How do you approach long-term net zero targets for a value-add portfolio with relatively short holding periods for the assets? Dan, you love this question.
So last night I lost my glasses. I can't see it again.
Long-term net zero targets for value-add portfolio, short holding periods.
So it's still, you're going to own something at a moment in time where you get to do the interventions. Value-add and opportunistic is all about fixing something. It could be a broken capital stack, but oftentimes it's something with the building that needs a refresh, right? So put that capital to work, because you're going to pass it on to somebody else. It could be a core fund. And a core fund is going to have, so a core fund strategy is really, buying a stable income flow over time. So if that's your ultimate purchaser, then you want to set them up for success. It's really paramount on you to get them into that position. So, you work your program and you become a partner in progress for that part of the chain, right? And does it always manifest with a GRESB score? I think what we observe investors are looking for is the baseline improve over time. If that fund is only around for 2, 3, 4 years and then sunsets, well, you've got the next fund and you've got a track record, and people will begin to expect that from you. And that's really what the game is at for the value add and opportunistic folks.
I would add, there's also a bit of risk management or risk mitigation even though it's a short-term play potentially, if I'm the purchaser, the next purchaser of that asset, and you have left items there that I perceive as things that may drive down the value because you did not address them, then I'm not going to pay the premium for the property. I'm going to discount it. So you have to think about, how is this going to impact the valuation, and is it going to be potentially discounted? More and more, we're seeing more companies. I know we do a lot of due diligence when we're looking at properties. We don't just look at the pro forma, we also look at ESG factors. We look at really kind of a full ASHRAE evaluation. But we're really trying to understand, what are the risks of purchasing this property before it goes to committee, right? To figure out how much am I going to have to put into this in order to bring it up to my long-term plan, right? If the core fund is going to purchase that value, it's going from one fund type to another fund type. I'm going to discount your property if you have not addressed those things.
And we're in this moment in time where the capital markets are changing and expectations are changing around carbon. So both of these are confluent, they're happening together. And so as capital becomes more expensive, potentially more scarce, right, the dynamics around the green premium brown discount conversation are going to change. And then you layer in carbon, oh my goodness. So if that's not on the table for others that are out there, there's likely going to be some difficult conversations when a transaction happens and you haven't done the things that Chris just talked about.
Particularly like when you think about cities with performance ordinances. New York City.
The whole other, we haven't even talked about regulation.
Yeah, you get into like New York City with local law 97, in 2 years, what's going to be the value of my property if I have like this annual 7-figure fine associated because my carbon load is so high, right? So I mean, that brings a whole nother twist, and that's not just a New York thing. There's like 11 jurisdictions that have these laws now, including a couple states. There's 33 that have made a commitment by 2024 to also have these ordinances, right, or laws. So,
but that's the thing, no one's written the check yet. So it's like, oh, well, maybe it's going to be okay, but whoa, it's going to get real soon,
right,
very soon.
And the problem is, what's going to happen is December 29th, everybody's going to pick up the phone and call their vendor and say, hey, we need to make sure we're in compliance by January 1st.
Mm.
These compliance with these type of laws
Looking forward to it.
requires taking that whole life cycle of OPEX, CAPEX. You can't do that in 2 days. So you have to have the audits. You have to have the OPEX plan, the CAPEX plan. You have to actually make the investment, do the installation in order to be in line with that target. It's not going to happen in 2 days. You need to be thinking a year or two out.
I think there's some people out there that think that Hail Mary is going to happen, where the regulation will be punted down the road, and we're going to push it a couple more years later. I don't know. I don't think that's a good strategy.
Yeah, so it's a gamble.
It is.
All right, another audience question. When ESG is discussed, I continue to hear 90% about the E. What about the S and G? So I think that's true. I think that's changing a lot. If you look back at the last decade or so, it was heavily in the E, and especially we're here talking about commercial real estate, right? So buildings use energy, buildings use water, buildings make carbon, and we're heavy on the E, right? But the discussion has expanded, and when we made the switch from calling it sustainability to ESG, it was an intentional switch to include the S and G. The whole game of ESG, you talk to any of peers, Dan will say ESG means business. We talk about ESG, it has to make business sense, right? So it's just smart business. So if you look at something like the S and you say we're going to have better training and less safety incidents and diversity, we're not going to get sued as much. We're not going to have employee turnover, so our costs will go down for recruiting and retention, and our customer satisfaction scores. That's just running a smart business. You could say that's part of an ESG strategy, but it's also just smart business. And similarly under the G, I think a lot of times we're talking with institutional firms that are kind of say the G is like the baseline expectation. I'm a fiduciary of someone's capital. You damn well bet I better have internal audit and fraud prevention and internal controls and all those types of things. So the discussion has expanded, but when we're talking about things like these fines, right? You're talking about these 7-figure fines. That's on the E still, right? Like no one's coming out to fine your company for not having any diversity in the boardroom just yet, right? There are some mandates out there. So NASDAQ put a mandate out there to have 1 female and 1 minority on the board. Something like 74% of the listed companies on NASDAQ don't comply, and there was a time period to get those, and they can't be the same person. So you can't do like the woman who's also a minority. They have to be 2 separate human beings. So some things are happening like that. There's no stick, there's no punitive measure. I suppose you could get kicked off the NASDAQ. But I think that's why the focus has been so heavy on the E, because the regulation is there, and also because that's when you talk about a cost savings within an ESG program. Using less energy will cost less money. Using less water will cost less money. So that's where you see a lot of the ROI in the programs. But I think the conversation is expanding as to how to do the S&G and how to make how to do it in a way that there's a quantitative facet to it. It's not just a squishy like the social doing the right thing. Like, how do you actually put KPIs to that? And you absolutely can. So
I would challenge the question. I don't know that. If you notice, there's not a comma in between E and S and G. They're all linked. The governance are the policies that allow the E to work. The people are the reason why the E works. The people are the reason for the G. You cannot look at this in silos and say, well, what about the S? Well, what about the G? It is E, S, G, not E, comma, S, comma, G.
I like it.
So therefore, you need to think about how they interact. You're absolutely right that there is increased discussion about the S, but it's also not just about your own company. I mean, like in our case, we have residents, right, who live in these properties, and they're part of that S, right? And they want to live in a healthy and well building. So health and wellness of the resident is also important. Who would want to live in a building that makes you sick? Nobody. So therefore, and those are things that we've always thought about. There's through the years we've been thinking about, lead in pipes and asbestos. And I mean, you go through history, there's things that are looking at, and you could say that those are E items, but you could also say that they're S items because they impact the people.
Yeah, so they're very interconnected. It's a good point.
At GRES, what we do is we benchmark, and with the S, we're looking at 2 different groups. One is the firm that's managing the capital, and then the second are what Chris just brought up, the residents of, or the occupants of whatever building type is in this fund or REIT. And so at the end of the day, it's about best practices. And what are you doing for the employees to make sure that the capital is being managed well and deployed well, and you've got the best talents in that you can. And then what's happening at these properties to keep tenants in place, because a tenant in place is, the best investment that you've got, right? Otherwise, you've got turnover. So when you look at all the questions in GRES that are tied to the S, it's really trying to tease out those best practices at both. And just by confronting a company on an annual basis with these issues, it puts them on the table. It makes them real and tangible, and people start to talk about them and move them forward. That's the whole idea.
Okay, we have 2 questions here, 2 separate questions, but around the same topic of embodied carbon. So we talk a lot about operational carbon. So talk a bit more about how do you analyze embodied carbon? How do you get data, reliable data around it? So 2 separate folks ask about that.
Want me to jump in?
Oh, I do, because it's super hard. And
it is.
I know it's the next.
But when you think about embodied carbon,
Why don't you say what it is first?
Yeah. So embodied carbon is the amount of carbon that is in the product or in your value chain, either upstream or downstream of that chain. So when you think about the life cycle, right? And let's say you have a piece of steel, and that steel gets mined. The elements of the steel get mined, they get transported to a factory. A factory uses fossil fuel to melt that, which is really high temperatures, and a lot of fossil fuels burn in order to burn that, in order to melt that. And then it's transported to your site. All of those pieces are all pieces of embodied carbon. So when I think of embodied carbon, I really kind of put it into a scope 3 kind of conversation. First of all, most embodied carbon is going to be more of a developer or even remodel type conversation. So they're not necessarily going to be in everyday, day-to-day operations of an existing building, although they do come into play. But I think the first step with the scope 3 emission, be it embodied carbon or be it any other scope 3 emissions, which include things like your employees driving to work and traveling and that type of stuff. Is it material or not? So that's the first question. So a lot of times when we look at embodied carbon, we actually look at it and we say, at what point do we start counting the carbon? Do we take it all the way back to the time it was mined, or do we really just take it from the time it was made into a piece of steel and then transported to my site? So that's the first step, almost back to that same, notice there's a process here in the cycle that we keep repeating, and that is first look at it and establish the baseline. Is this material to me or not? And by material, we mean what is the total impact on your organization? One of the things that scope 3 is hard. There's just no doubt about it. Scope 3, and it's because it's somebody else's scope 1 and scope 2. So therefore, it's indirect. But we've talked several times through the years about how the scope 3 is really like the fire in your neighbor's yard who is making hamburgers for you and you're eating the hamburger. Mm-hmm. The fire is in his yard or her yard, and they're the ones that burnt the fuel to cook the hamburger, but you're eating the hamburger. They wouldn't have needed to burn that fuel had you not eaten the hamburger.
Truth be told, that was the first time I fully understood scope 3, was when you explained it in that way.
So, I mean, that's kind of like at its really simplest form, and that's what I meant earlier about educating, right? We have to talk to people in ways that they can understand what it is we're talking about, but we have to figure out, is that one hamburger, do I eat enough hamburgers for that to really impact my footprint? Now, if I eat a hamburger every day, you know what? that might actually be a material part of my footprint. If I eat one a year, it may not be. So you have to kind of look at what's the materiality of it, and then from there you have to start measuring it. The cool thing about scope 3 that I think is we have a shadow. All organizations have a shadow, and we can impact others through our demands and needs and requirements, right? If you run a procurement exercise, you set up certain standards that you want your suppliers to provide you with. And if in those standards, you're able to say, do you track your emissions, scope 1 and scope 2? Do you have an ESG plan? Do you have questions that you can then ask your supply chain? Now we're engaging not just our organization, but the organizations that feed into our organization. Walmart's like 95% of Walmart's scope 3 emissions are scope 3 emissions. They're not scope 1, they're scope 3.
But what I'm hearing is, okay, so we often buy things based on price, and having another signal to say, well, this is a low carbon solution at that fits the requirements for the job, whether it's steel or whatever, right? That's not something that's really marketed right now. So the big elephant that's in the room is we don't price carbon. It's a negative externality, at least in this country. There are certainly other places around the world that have carbon prices. I was just in Toronto yesterday, and they have carbon prices, and those carbon prices are ratcheting up over time. So the scope 3 conversation will work its way into the economics. Right now, it's just it's sitting out there, and what we're trying to do is make better choices with our downstream supply chain based on who has low carbon solutions.
Yep. And to truly get to 0, we're going to have to include scope 3. So truly,
of course.
Yeah.
So, it's great that you're able to address scope 1 and scope 2, and if everybody addressed scope 1 and scope 2, that would be my scope 3 and I'm covered. But the problem is not everybody does. So therefore, we're going to have to address scope 3 and try to figure out how to impact that in order to truly get.
Yeah.
All right, I like this one. How would a baseline for a set of properties be comparable to a new set of properties 10 years later?
Okay, so we've got an existing, for a new set of properties 10 years later.
It's like a 5th grade word problem.
So if you get on the train.
Yeah, at this miles per hour, and I get on the train at this miles per hour.
I mean, when I think about baselining, and this is probably not the context that the question was intended, but when I think of baselining and comparing properties, I'm not really comparing the age of the property necessarily as a deciding factor. I'm looking at things like climate zone, property type. Is it a garden style? Is it a mid-rise? Is it a high-rise? Perhaps I might get as sophisticated as looking at, is it a centrally controlled system, unitized system? I'm probably not necessarily looking at age as a deciding factor. And I'll tell you the reason why is because I think there's a misperception that if something's old, that that it has a bad envelope. And I would say go to Europe if you think that's the case, because what's old here compared to what's old in Europe are two different things. And the walls in a lot of older buildings are actually quite thick. And
I think there's a
quite good.
clarification
So,
yeah.
point too, going back to a shorter fund life.
okay. I thought we were comparing.
Thank you for the
properties.
clarification.
I don't have a very good answer for this one. I mean,
You've stumped the experts.
well,
John, good work.
I thought that the issue was really, can you build your way out of it? Are we building green buildings, gold, platinum buildings that are going to be delivered in 2024, 2025, are inherently superior than something that was delivered in 2015? I don't know. Buildings are very complex beasts.
They don't
And
go
so-
away. They stick around.
Yeah.
What is it? 90% of the buildings that'll be here in 2050 are already here.
Yeah.
Something like that. So you're not going to build your way out of all those buildings. We're not
Right.
tearing all those buildings down.
Right.
But the fun part of it.
All right,
All
how are we
right, for
doing?
future discussion. This one's an easier one. We are just starting out on our ESG journey, one of my favorite ones. What are the fundamental things we should be doing to get going? It definitely seems overwhelming. So I might take that one. So it is overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. The good news is there's a lot of information out there. And one thing we always talk about in our ESG community is that everyone's willing to help share, give you ideas, that kind of thing. People aren't hoarding their practices and their strategies. Like for the most part, they want to get them out there, and you can find a firm that has similar goals to yours or similar, property inventory, and you can do some peer comparison. But a great first step we talked about is a materiality assessment, and it's before you start doing stuff. So Dan will always talk about the random acts of sustainability, and you can do this at this building, and this at this building, and this at this building, but someone has to be kind of conducting the orchestra. So the materiality assessment is a good way to sit down with your organization, with all the stakeholders that are involved, figure out what is it you're trying to do? Why are you even doing this ESG journey you're about to go on? What should it look like for your firm? Because that's not necessarily what it should look like for your firm or my firm. It's really unique. And then it gives you a roadmap, right? So that you can say, we're looking at the next 36 months. In Q1 of next year, we're going to do these things. In Q2 of next year, we're going to do these things. In Q3 of the following year, we're going to do these things. Then you kind of, you've made yourself a plan. So it's not like just saying, I'm going to lose 50 pounds, to the analogy we had at the beginning. You're saying, in the first week, I'm going to do this exercise and this diet, and I'm going to lose 2 pounds. And then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to add on this. And it gives you kind of like the lay of the land and the plan. And then when external stakeholders ask you, whether it be investors, employees, whomever it might be, what are you doing? You say, well, here's what we've done, but also we have this plan and this roadmap. Here's what we're going to do. So you kind of have it all laid out. It tells the story. From there, you can get more tactical, right? So that's going to be like your treasure map, if you will. It's gonna be the soul searching exercise. You're going to engage everyone at your company so that everyone's on the same page. Their interests have been socialized and are part of this plan. And then that's going to inform, your ESG journey, your ESG strategy. So that's always a great place to start. We're happy to help you with that, of course. And I don't know if you guys have anything to add, but that's, to me, like the first step of the 1,000-mile journey is the materiality assessment.
I think that's really wise. People ask me often, what does GRES compete with? And I say we compete with inertia, right? You get started, and if you look at what GRES is, it's a framework of best practices on the ESG, which is a big tent of issues. And when you do it, it becomes eye-opening. And all the questions are Boolean. Does this attribute exist or not within the firm? And then what does good, better, and best look like? So that's the whole idea. And then by benchmarking against peers, you start to get some good ideas. And the idea really behind GRES is to get the market to move. So people in their various companies will start to solve the data problem, will start to tackle issues. And then as the benchmark continues to evolve and the issues move forward, the whole industry is able to follow what certain leaders will do. They'll break out and they'll come up with a technology that will be implemented to get more data on assets that were prior to this dark. So then Chris picks up on this and says, oh, well, look at this new thing. Then they start to implement it in their portfolio. And then everyone's moving, right? So you're really busting against inertia, but you have to start with what's material to you, because it's going to be different by different companies and different property types.
I think the first step is take a breath.
I did with my answer. Thank you.
I mean, I remember a conversation you and I had a few years ago. I forget the client. It was a Greystar client, and they were talking about wanting to do GRES when they were a little fearful about pursuing the journey. Like, should I do it or not? And I don't remember the exact context of it, but the thing that stood out to me, and you kind of said it again yesterday as well, at the presentation yesterday, and that is, if you're not doing it, you're at 0 already. So you're not doing anything, right? So all those 5-star and 4-star companies in year 1, and this is where our conversation came in, they all did terrible, probably. Almost all of us. Nobody does great, right? You don't run a marathon on day 1. But what happens is every day, to your point, you get a little stronger, right? And you get a little better. And you're not competing against everybody else out there. You're really competing against yourself in a way. So just, that's why I say take a breath. It'll be okay. It is overwhelming. There's a lot to there. Just take the first step. Don't worry about step 10 yet. Just take the first step. And then the first step, honestly, is get your data, figure out what your consumption is, set the baseline, and then follow the recipe.
Ely talked about a treasure hunt around the organization. It often is that, because you're looking for policies, procedures, and operational data and all sorts of things. Once you wrangle it, it's usually in year 3 in GRES that people start hitting their stride, right?
Yeah,
and you confront people on an annual you confront executive teams and firms, people within the firm with these questions annually and say, wow, and people are going to look and they're going to say, wow, we're having to answer no to question 6 because we're not doing that. But boy, I wanted to get that project done around here for the past 6-7 years. And then guess what happens in 2023? The project gets prioritized, gets put on a burn down list, and things start to happen. That's why I say we compete with inertia.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes you think about things like, I mean, that's one thing I did appreciate with the it's almost like a lead even, right? Should we be doing that? Maybe we should. We hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
Should we have a policy on this? You know, Greg says, do you have these things, right? So you know what? We've been meaning to get that policy. Now I have something to kind of push me to go get it. So it kind of gives you a nice kind of like a goal, like that you can kind of aim towards. But it sort of gives you that checklist of like, these are things I should probably, if I'm not doing, other people are doing these, why? And then you can start to, you learn a lot about your organization. Like the first time you do any type of benchmark, no matter what kind it is, you're looking internally and you're learning and you're like, oh, you know what? I thought we had a policy on that. I didn't realize we didn't, or it hasn't been touched in 20 years, right? So, and that's why you kind of use that LEED reference as well. LEED was sort of the same thing with how do you build a building? Should we think about a control system? I don't know. Should we? We've never done it before, but they're asking for it. We may or may not, but let's at least have the discussion.
But be careful, right? Don't, just like in LEED, you don't do something just to get another LEED point. Don't do something to just get another GRES point, right? Think about the issue. How does it apply to our circumstance and our organization and our company? And then make a decision. You might actually come up with something better. Right. And then it becomes part of GRES because you made the advance.
And that's why the materiality is so important, right? Because what's material to me? Otherwise, I'm chasing a million different things and I'm doing the flavor of the day. And I may be spending a lot of time and effort on something that is not important.
Yeah.
That's a danger, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Couple minutes left. Maybe we'll try to jam one more question in because why not? All right, so clarification from the question before. Let's take a swing at it if we can.
Okay.
If you make a net zero commitment, you establish a baseline. If you have a short fund life, how are you comparing emissions 10 years from now to reach the goal of net zero? So I think you're talking about just the assets turning over so much that you establish the baseline, right? But you're short fund life. I don't know that we have the answer. Like
I would think though, like if your goals should reflect your fund. If you have a fund that has a 5-year life, your goals shouldn't be past 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Other than preparing them for the next transaction.
Like you talked about, yeah.
So I don't know if that completely answers it, but yeah, I don't know that if I know for a fact I'm selling this asset in 5 years, I'm not planning for 2050.
Yeah.
But what I am planning for is the sale of the asset 5 years from now to make sure there's nothing that's going to reduce the value of the asset on transaction because I didn't take steps that could take.
Yeah, there's definitely a disconnect with the timing, right? So I now understand the spirit of that question.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do what you can within your hold period, in your window, right? But I keep going back to being a partner in progress because it's going to take all of us to make that happen. And what you don't want is you don't want to have left things on the table, to Chris's point about 10, 15 minutes ago, and during some financial moment of truth, whether it's a lease or a sale, to have that come back to bite you.
All right, we are top of the hour sharp. Thank you, friends. So good to see you. So good to have you here. This was a good one, enjoyable as always. And thank you for everyone who joined, and the recording will be out to you shortly. A good rest of your week and a good holiday season.
Big thanks
Thank
to the
you.
audience.
Happy holidays.
Yep.